Right, folks. The 18 portfolio reviews are done. Thanks for supporting the channel. We can now move back into talking about environment art stuff. And a bit of lighting as well, but for the next few weeks, environment art stuff. So we've moved from topology from the last few weeks. We're now moving on to Trimsheets, the sort of texturing side of the topology talk. And Trimsheets are one of the toughest things to grasp when you're starting. And even once you grasp them, there's so many techniques to them. So we're going to take a look at a few sources. So we've got here, what are the different types of trim sheets and how do they work? And we've got two columns that we're going to discuss today. As usual, if you want to support, I do have a portfolio review and mentorship option or a simple donate option if you like the content and you want to support. Other than that, let's get into it. So, trim sheets. We're going to go over the next few weeks about different aspects of trim sheets, but starting off, let's start by talking about what are the different types of trim sheets. There's about two different types if you want to get into it, right? So first type is the tiling trim sheet. Second type is the Atlas/hybrid trim sheet. We're going to start off with the tiling trim sheet. Tiling trim sheet is your more traditional trim sheet. It's the one that is, in my opinion, the easiest to get into, to make, and to tile across objects. And then the Atlas trim sheet is a little bit more, not too much, but a little bit more complex, but it uses the fundamentals of the tiling trim sheet. So what is a tiling trim sheet? It's essentially a texture that goes from left to right and is repeated across large surfaces. So if we have a look at this material by Camille, sorry if I got your name wrong. Here's the portfolio for Assassin's Creed Mirage. This sort of boat ship exterior tiling left to right, wood texture with some handles on. I'm getting the terminology wrong because I don't know much about ships, and then some bits sticking out and some nice roughness, and then how it's used in game. So it's tiled across this big ship to act as the hull for the ship. And because it's a large surface, it uses a trim sheet. So we're going to get into some examples, but the main reason you use a trim sheet is because, one, after a certain real world scale, you can't use unique textures anymore. It doesn't fit Texel Density. Because if you think when we had that talk with Nate Stevens, we talk about how 512 per 1 meter was last gen, current gen is 1024 per meter. This ship is, I don't know, 10 meters high. I don't know how many meters wide, but it's way more than 1-2 meters, right? So you're not going to use lots of little 1024s. You're going to use a trim sheet. The trim sheet can repeat across large surfaces, thus retain text density. Okay. So next is how the trim sheets work. So they tile from left to right. So because this is round and this is a cylinder, you don't really see it, but after a certain point, there is going to be a repeat in the surface of the texture. Usually trim sheets are planned out to about 2 to 4 meters. They can be a meter as well, as long as they have like a square dimension. You'll be able to tile stuff nice and easy. And the way it works is you make these textures, which are, they can tile left to right, they can be stone, they can be wood, and you tile the geometry across them. So we've got an example here from Polygon Academy, which he has a free series online about trim sheets, which is great. But this is a great image because it shows what the UVs look like when using a trim sheet. Now, when you start off, you're taught to keep things inside the 0 to 1 square. And my brush is like absolutely huge. So this is what we refer to as the 0 to 1 square. When you do props, you're taught to unwrap in here, make sure it fits the box, and texture. Now, the reason why learning environment art is very difficult after learning a year of basic 3D and texturing is that you're now taught that your UVs can actually go outside the box. Because at the end of the day, what is outside this box are other little boxes at the same dimension. Your 3D program will only show the one unless you set it to. But what happens is that texture repeats 0 to 1, 0 to 2, and vice versa. That's why when you go outside of the UV, it's fine because you're just repeating your, strip of geometry. Here, you're repeating it across the surface. Now, this one is nicely snapped in the center, but you could go all the way out with this and it would be fine as well. So keep that in mind. So yes, you are meant to go outside the UV square, and you can do, and it's fine when using Trimsheets, because that's the way you repeat the texture. We've got another tiling trim sheet here by Jonathan. So again, a very sort of trim sheets are generic. You can't put too much special or unique detail in them, otherwise it will repeat. Because trim sheets are meant to lay the foundation for large surface areas. They're meant to tackle big, vast game worlds so that you can stay flexible. You can change stuff on the fly and it changes multiple areas at once and vice versa. So we've got some cool pattern in here, and then this has been tiled on, again, a basic polygon roof, push and pulling the geometry to pop bits out. And then on the corners, corners with trim sheets, you can use symmetry. You can use a symmetry modifier at 45 degrees, and that will kind of wrap the trim sheet around it. It is a limitation of trim sheets when you have corners like this, that your texture will have a seam or it will look a bit warped. It's just the nature of trim sheets, right? When you introduce corners or flared shapes that aren't straight or aligned, you are going to get a little bit of texture stretching. But there are ways to hide that. So again, this tile's left to right. It was probably made on I can't draw a square for crap, but it was probably made on a 2 meter plane, 4 meter plane, geometry projected onto the plane, baked, textured, ready to unwrap and wrap around onto geometry. So a tiling trim sheet can repeat on itself and is designed in a way to tile left and right or up and down to use on thinner geometry, aka trims. Again, another example, using the Maya UV by Blue Pixel. They are wrapping the wall of their environment around this trim sheet, and they're finding, quads and strips of detail in their block out. I do recommend you have a block out with the general shapes that you're doing before you start making a trim sheet, just so that you can get the measurements and see how it's going to work. But yes, once you have a trim sheet, you can really map as much as you want. You can find areas that your trim sheet wasn't designed for and map it to an area. That's the flexibility of trim sheets. You eventually find a way that this can be used on something else past what it's meant to be used for. You'll also notice on a lot of trim sheets it is common to make sure that the element on the edge is in the middle, so that it can, when it tiles, it will make a nice full triangle. So just keep that in mind as well. You see this often with bricks or patterns that go off the 0 to 1 square. But again, they're going outside of it, which is fine, because that's what you're meant to do with trim sheets. Another example, completely different artist, completely different trim sheet. What they're doing, they're going outside. Not to touch grass, but they're going outside the 0 to 1 UV. So if we have a look at our note here, 0 to 1 box. Yeah, this red box is your 0 to 1. This is where you place your main UVs for a prop. But when you are doing trim sheets, you can just put them in there to the side. It doesn't matter because every square outside of this is the same texture. So if you wanted, you could move all these UVs down here to the same spot and it would work fine. Which is why it's common in prop modeling to, if you have a UV and you mirror it, it's common to offset it instead of overlapping it for a prop because it's just cleaner. But yeah, lots of overlapping UVs. That's why it's shaded. You can see here, quaded geo, nice strips of polygons. And when you have strips of polygons, you can map various trim elements to it. All right. So, what's the difference between a trim sheet and a tilable texture? So, it's about the XY and the XYZ. So, a tilable texture goes in every direction, used for big surfaces, and an XY goes in one direction, but not the band One Direction, which if you're not British, you may, well, I'm sure everyone knows One Direction now, but no, not this, as in left and right. And we get into our first review / look at professional work where tilables and trim sheets are being used together. So this is by Pitar. and this is a commercial work from Assassin's Creed Mirage. And let's just take it in for a moment. Let's just look and take in what we've got. So we've got like this castle fort entrance. Yeah, looks cool. Daytime version. Cool. And let's look at some of the notes we've got, right? So, trim sheet, One Direction, but not the band. This is a thin element. It's a trim. It's horizontal, it's thin. Therefore, using a tilable texture on it would be a waste because a tilable texture can fill a lot of space. But if we've got a trim, that's why we use a trim sheet. Again, here, very trim-esque in nature. Up here, very trim-esque as well. All right. Decal. So we covered decals in some of the topology talks. Decals are floated on top of the surface and they have specific detail. And again, it is a tool to help break up tilable textures because you texture an environment, buildings, floors, walls with tilable textures and trim sheets, but they look generic and boring because they're tilable. So you break them up. Decals is one way, vertex painting is another way, prop placement is another way. So your goal is to break those surfaces up and hide the fact that you've used the same texture over and over. So that's why you see it being masterfully used in Assassin's Creed. What else have we got? Tilable texture every direction. So the brick is covering so much of this castle. That needs to be a XYZ tiling texture, tile in every direction. It makes unwrapping stuff very easy to do. You'll also notice if it comes up on your monitor, there is some slight sort of dirt / sand here that is vertex painted in. You can tell it's very different. This is a very specific detail, this leak, whereas this is kind of blending across the whole surface, which is why you can tell it's vertex painted as well. Again, and the rest of the castle is using various bits and pieces of trim, decal, vertex painting, and vice versa. We go over to the daytime version. Set dressing is a great way to hide the awkward intersection of two meshes crashed together. You'll see this a lot where the ground meets the bottom of buildings, usually is hidden with set dressing such as plants, foliage, to blend the harsh transition. So you can see the harsh transition a little bit here, because you can't dress every single edge in a game, it's just not feasible. But you can make an active effort to dress some of the main ones. Now, when you crash two polygon shapes into one another when they're not merged on a vertex level, which is very common in environments, this is usually where a building meets the ground or a modular piece meets another modular piece on an angle, you're going to get what we call a geometry seam, just that natural seam you get of crashing two meshes in together. You can use set dressing like this. This placement of this ivy or dead ivy is amazing because it hides such a large, messy area that would otherwise be visible with set dressing, which is really cool to see. And there's some over here as well. So yeah, a really good example is this asset over here. So this is from Valhalla Assassin's Creed. And you'll notice this red box. I just want you to focus on the ground. And just look at the amount of prop set dressing masterfully done, where you can almost not see a single harsh geometry seam of where the building meets the floor. You see it here, but the player has to get there. So, you know, there's limitations, but there's so much as like rocks and then foliage to layer on top. And foliage, prop with fruit in. You know, there's so much effort being done to hide that gamey sort of crashing a floor into a wall piece, you know, skirting with props, skirting with decals, you know, almost every edge of where these buildings meet the floor has been dressed. And even here, you know, they're using foliage to try and distract you from the fact that this crashes into the back of the wall. And even got blends of textures. Is there any other areas we can see where stuff crashes into one another? Like it's a bit here, but it doesn't matter up here. Like it's not going to be seen too much at that angle. But yes, it is mainly on floors. Here as well, you can see that there's some sort of skirting here to ease the transition of that crushed shape into the roof. So I call that geometry seams. Some people call it skirting. It is a pass on the environment to blend the assets together that aren't meant to be merged together. And you do that with set dressing and vertex painting, and you mix all of them together to get a nice seamless result. So the tiling trim sheet is a left to right tiling generic texture used on trims of buildings. It can be used in conjunction with tileable textures that repeat in every direction, but not one direction because, well, they're okay, but you don't really listen to them. So that's type 1. That's the one you should start with. Tiling trim sheet, making stuff that goes left to right, tiling it across big surfaces of geometry. The next one is the Atlas/hybrid trim sheet. Way more old school. Takes a lot of the fundamentals from the tiling trim sheet, but then mixes in unique detail. So we'll look at some classic examples. So we've got this building from Stefan, and you can see that there is the traditional tiling trim sheet element up here, which is used for the top of the roof. But then there aren't really any other tiling elements. If you try to repeat this texture, at least the bottom part of this texture, left to right, it would look really weird. So an Atlas trim sheet uses unique details on mixed. So this is unique, and this is tile. It mixes them together to tackle large assets, and this can be done on props as well. And this is where it starts to get really juicy. So you use the geometry and map it to these bits, and then just you hide the transition with pillars, or you do like little tricks to mix up your UVs. But starting out, if you're just starting to do modular or non-modular, it doesn't have to be modular, by the way. Can be or can't be. Trim sheets work either way. But if you're starting out, you can hide nasty intersections with pillars. Skyrim does a lot of that, especially with caves. It's a very common technique. Don't be afraid to use it. You don't need to make everything work like it does in the real world and merge it all into one piece and it perfectly tiles. Stuff will break at angles. Hide it with a mesh. Perfectly reasonable as long as it's done cleanly. So yeah, they've got a few windows that they can pop in and out. They've got a pillar, they've got the door to pop down here. And this is quite old school. This is how a lot of racing games were done for their buildings. They'd go out to reference trips, take on pictures of the top fronts of the buildings, stick them onto a texture sheet and straighten them in perspective and map them onto detail. Here's another example of a Atlas trim sheet. So the middle row here where I'm drawing my line, I'm going to Control Z it, but that middle line is unique. And then you have your tile and tile. So we've got tileable wood planks, a tileable wood board, and unique detail in the middle for the hinges and the wood ends. And what that results in is, by the way, this is by Anthony. This results in this, what's the Harry Potter rugby called? Harry Potter rugby. The stands for Harry Potter rugby. So lots of wood structures, way too big, way too repeated to use a unique texture. However, it has unique details on. You need hinges, you need metal bits to support. You have metal rails as well, which is part of the trim. So you use the trim sheet here to, you know, put wood ends to the storytelling. You've chopped this wood, it's going to have splints on the end. So you use that to map it to the wood ends. See if we can find another wood end in here. Any sort of exposed wood end will have the crack on, and then all the sort of length of the planks will use one of these textures, and then the actual floorboards of the texture are used here. So it's all masterfully planned out in a way that you can get the most out of this texture. And this is very optimal to do as well, because you're using one set of textures and a shader as opposed to trying to uniquely texture all of this. You're also retaining texel density as well, which is kind of cool. So yeah, I think this was probably meant as a, you know, I've not played the game, but you can probably see it from a certain distance, right, and not get too close to it. But yeah, it holds up. It's nice, and that's the benefit of it. If you need to make changes to this, you change the texture here, and it updates all at once. So that again is an Atlas trim sheet or a hybrid trim sheet. Another classic example, so Hamish Ames. This person has a tutorial for how they went about this, which is awesome. Again, you're seeing the same sorts of stories. This asset is way too big to be uniquely textured. Remember, once you start going above, remember 1024 per meter, You have a meter that's 2 meters by 2 meters, roughly. That's a 2K map. What happens when you have an asset that's 3 meters? You might get away with it. 4 meters. Do I need 2048? It's 5 meters. There's a certain scale, and that scale is debatable for everyone depending on your TD. But once you go above 2 meters, you have to start questioning if a trim sheet would be better, because you're going to lose resolution. If you lose resolution, that's bad, because some assets will be blurry, some will be sharp. It's better to have all the assets blurry, all the assets sharp, not mix and match, because that just takes the player right out of it. So this is a large asset, but a lot of it is very trim-esque. It's very thin, long pieces of geo, right? So you can see here, they've got every point up to the trim sheet. So where I'm going to draw this line, everything above this line is a what? It's a tiling trim sheet. And then at the bottom, it is Atlas detail. So unique detail that is either high to low poly or textures that are stuck on to sell the unique parts like the stickers, the lights, the stop signs. Maybe if you have some cola cans on here that were, it was messed up, and you could have those on there. And these trim elements are being used to keep the resolution on this large asset. So, this could have been made at, if this is a 2048 in today's standards, that would be a 2 meter plane. I don't know if this was, but this was a few years ago, but this could be, this could be a 200 by 200 plane with the trim detail mapped on, baked to 2048. And then what you have is the scale of the texture is the exact scale of the beams. Therefore, you're 1-to-1 in scale. So you should generally be wary of scaling trim sheets. I recommend, if you're going to scale UVs onto a trim sheet past its purpose, I recommend that you stick to a 20% buffer. Up and down. 20% is usually pretty good, rule for life. If you go past that, you start to break texel density. So yes, I know a lot of people love to scale trim sheets, but when you start to dramatically scale them, you trade off the consistency of texel density for flexibility, which a lot of games do, fair enough. But ideally, in an ideal world, if you want to hit the best visual quality, you should not scale a trim sheet that much, in my opinion. But I do know that it is scaled a lot in industry, so that's just my personal opinion based on what I've been taught over the years. So yeah, lots of cool detail, lots of unique detail, massively done, mapped to this asset. Again, if you need to change the textures on here, it changes on here. So easy to maintain. You don't have to have 5, 6, 7 separate textures to just make this asset. Do check out Hamish Ames' stuff. Got some really cool tutorials on there as well. So whilst an atlas can include tiling elements, the primary design is to use geometry to tile the texture itself instead of tiling the texture across the geometry. Now that's for atlas. So this terminology is a bit older. So this is more of an atlas trim sheet, whereas this is more of a hybrid trim sheet. If you want to make it simple, tiling trim sheet, hybrid trim sheet. A tiling trim sheet can go left to right no matter what. A hybrid trim sheet can go left to right, but has bits that don't go left to right for unique detail. All right, so keep an eye on that one. Very common on old school racing games. Yeah, this technique, atlas trim sheets they've been in there since the 50s. No games in the 50s, but if there were, they would have been there. So I want to get into story time. So there was a studio in the UK called Bizzare Creations. It's long been closed. It was a really awesome big name studio in the UK. They did Project Gotham and they did 007 Bloodstone from what I remember. They had an art test. Now, the age of art test is slowly dying, what I've noticed. At least the age of big over-the-top art tests, which is good, because art tests, I think they should be paid and they should be small. So, but back in the day, art tests were everywhere. And Bizzare Creations had a very famous one. So rest in peace. Bizzare apparently is now Lucid, which is cool. That's cool. So Bizzare had an art test, and it was an Atlas-based trim sheet art test. I never understood how to do this when I was a student. When I saw this art test, I was like, what? Now, the art test was to do this New York building, and they provided you, I think they provided you, like my details on this might be a bit off, but they provided you a texture pack of photography, of building fronts, all the things you need to make a texture. And the art test involved cropping parts out of the photographic reference, straightening it, and laying it out onto an atlas to map geometry to. Because a lot of games, like, you got to remember, for a lot of racing games, you zoom past buildings. Unless you're me and you drive at 10 miles an hour. So you zoom past them, so you don't need that much detail in them. So this person, so Paul Clayton, have done a good job on this art test. They have taken the photography texture pack, broken it into textures, and then mapped just cubes with extrusions on. You map, so we take this window, for example, you would map this onto a flat plane with the windows on. You still do this to this day with certain things. Then once you've mapped it onto the flat plane, you start to cut. I wish there was a straight line tool on here. You start to cut geometry, tracing the texture. And you do this with Trimsheets to this day, because Trimsheets tile on everything. So you cut the geo out, you know, you'd add your edge loops or different pieces of geo. And then once you've got those, you know, you add some depth to it, right? So you extrude back or you extrude forward and you give it some depth. And then you might be asking, what happens to the bits on the inside, the depth? You just remap them or you leave them blurry. Depends if the player can get close. But yeah, obviously you see a lot of repetition, a lot of baked in lighting information, but there was no PBR back then, right? So you see that, you know, we're mirroring the window here to save texture space. And you can learn a lot from this sort of stuff, because the texture optimization this person is doing is still good to do to this day. Obviously, you won't see as obvious repetition from photography and all this sort of stuff because the workflows have changed a little bit more. However, you can still learn of where you can mirror, how you can use pillars to hide intersections between stuff. And as you go up higher and higher where the player can't reach, there is less and less geometry, which is, again, very clever optimization, right? So a lot of the, a good art test for this, you know, a lot of the detail would be down on this floor for polygons, right? And then when you start going up and up, less and less until you get to a box with textures. And it's good optimization. You don't need to optimize that hard nowadays, but you still want to optimize and make an active effort to optimize in a clean, smart way. Unless you're using nanite, then you just take what you get with nanite. But even then, just, you know, if you are doing hard surfacey buildings, modular, try and keep it clean. So that's kind of old school. So what's a modern example of this? And we come to another Assassin's Creed piece by Nikolai. Sorry if I got your name wrong. So let's take it in. Big gate in Assassin's Creed Mirage. The high poly sculpt used. The high poly sculpt with the texture used. The asset on its own in comparison to the player. Now this is basically like this. The only difference is this is used for a gate, and instead of individual windows on a texture map, actually it's more like, because you can't see the texture file, it's more like this one, right? Which is the same, but this is the same approach, but with modern age development in it, right? So instead of the individual windows, it's these emblems. Instead of the trim on the roof, it's the trim at the bottom. You see, it doesn't change. You know, it advances, but we're still, this is fundamental stuff. This is really good to know. They're using it in Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is an amazing looking game. So these things are both the same. It's just a gap of 15 plus years with modern workflows, all right? So let's have a look at what's going on here. So we've got trim sheet type 1. What is it? Tell me in the comments. And then we've got trim sheet type 2. What is that one? Have a guess in the comments or to yourself in front of the computer. Both of those are merged into what we call the hybrid. And this trim sheet is being used to make this door. Now, before we look at the notes, remember that anything that you start to go above 2 meters on, 1024 per meter, 2 meters high, 2 meters wide, 2048. So if we just say that, I don't know, let's say this character is 1.8, So we'll say that maybe like here, let's just say that this chunk is 2 meters by 2 meters, and just work with me like as a visualization, right? So if we're doing texel density properly, this is a 1024. This is a 1024. 10, 10, 10, 10. That is obviously as a combined result, that is a 2048 by 2048. Look how much room that takes up of this door. You would need like 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 separate textures with each roughness, normal, and vice versa to retain the texel density required to make this asset. So as you go up in scale, you cannot unique unwrap. Now, there are exceptions with rocks. There are shader workflows with rocks, which goes outside the scope of this asset and this talk, where you can scale up and scale down and still retain a unique sculpt, but a tilable texture. That is for another day. But for most cases, yes, you will need to use a trim sheet. So because this is a trim, this is being mapped to all this ribbon-esque geometry. If you really break it down, this door is made up of lots of strips of polygons. And you start to see the problem I spoke about earlier, which again, it's fine, this happens. But when you have a 45-degree transition for trim sheets, see if we can find an area where it's really obvious. Here. Okay, yeah, here. So when you have an area like this in the trim sheet, you're always going to get a weird seam. You can see that the seam here, the dirt doesn't map over. It's just a byproduct of trim sheets. But it doesn't matter. It's such a tiny area. Who cares, right? So as long as you're mapping the main surfaces, you're going to be good to go. So what notes have we got for this? Yep, once you go above real world scale to a certain point, you have to use a trim sheet and shader trickery. So obviously this is being vertex blended with a rust or a sand. That helps break it up. The emblems are being modeled on and popped out slightly. And the tilable elements are being used to tile for the base of the door. You may think, how is the inner door tilable? Like this bit here. Well, if you really think about the geometry, right? The geometry is like this. And the UVs are most likely like this for one, and then the other. They're separated and the seam is split on the 45-degree angle. So that's how, again, all of this is strips when you think about it. There's nothing really that requires a large surface area. Unlike the brick wall here, you have that tile in every direction. Yeah, if we have a look a bit more, yeah, you can see right when you start to have the transitions, because this here is obviously quadded and UV'd, and then this area is unwrapped and straightened. But because that angle here is at 45 degrees, you always get a bit of a seam, which again is completely normal. But yeah, there's lots of shader tech being used here, most likely, like detail normals, which are small normal maps scaled across an asset to sharpen it, vertex painting, and there could even be blend masks, but blend masks is for another day. So yeah, that is what we call the Atlas trim sheet. So this is getting a bit long now. So to conclude, there's a tiling trim sheet that goes left to right, aka one direction. There's a hybrid trim sheet which can go left to right, but also have unique details on it. You make these to tackle large assets that are flexible, quick to change, and optimized in memory. And when you have an asset that is larger and starts to get larger and larger beyond 2 meters, for you to contain a texel density of 1024 per meter, once you start going above 2-3 meters, you are going to lose texel density or waste texture space unless you're very optimal with how you UV. So in most cases, you will start to use a trim sheet. Trim sheets can be used on assets, they can be used on surfaces, they can be used on buildings. You can use trim sheets on every type of asset in the games industry. It's just that they are very common on large objects, but can also be used on small objects. And that's about it for the types of trim sheets. So hopefully that helped. If you have any questions, ask them below. And as we move on over the next few weeks, we'll cover different parts of trim sheets. But yeah, for now, peace.